The clerk, a guy who looked like he'd wrestled alligators for fun, just raised an eyebrow. "Your entire front yard?" "Yep," I said, trying to sound confident. "Going for a rustic look." "Rustic, huh?" He chuckled. "Well, you've come to the right place. What kind? Sweet corn, field corn, popcorn?" I blinked. The kind that grows tall?" He grinned. "I got just the thing. I've never considered myself a master gardener, but I've always enjoyed getting my hands dirty, nurturing plants, and adding a touch of color to the world. So, when I moved into my new house in Silver Springs Meadow, one of the first things I did was create a small flower bed along the front walkway. It wasn't much, just a small patch of color along the walkway. Roses, daisies, and a few wildflowers I'd picked up at the local nursery. It was my little escape, my way of bringing a bit of nature to the otherwise sterile landscape of Silver Springs Meadow. I should have known that any attempt at beauty would be met with swift and merciless opposition from the HOA, I thought, as I admired my handiwork. The roses, a classic variety in shades of pink and red, were just beginning to bloom. The daisies, with their cheerful yellow centers and white petals, added a touch of brightness. And the wildflowers, a mix of poppies, cornflowers, and lupins, provided a splash of vibrant, untamed beauty. It was a simple pleasure, a small act of creative expression, a way to connect with the earth and add a bit of personality to my otherwise ordinary suburban home. The bees and butterflies seemed to appreciate it too, flitting from flower to flower, adding a touch of life and movement to the scene. Little did I know, my humble flower bed was about to become the epicenter of a suburban turf war. I just didn't realize how quickly or how absurdly that war would escalate. The knock on the door was sharp, insistent, and utterly devoid of any hint of neighborly warmth. It was the knock of a man on a mission, a man with a clipboard, a man who probably measured his grass with a ruler and alphabetized his canned goods by expiration date, Gerald Jerry Peterson. Picture a man whose wardrobe consisted entirely of pressed khakis and polo shirts, whose spirit animal was a perfectly manicured lawn, and whose favorite pastime was enforcing the HOA's endless list of rules and regulations. He was the self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics, the king of conformity, and, unfortunately for me, the president of the Silver Springs Meadow HOA. He stood on my porch, his expression a mixture of disapproval and righteous indignation, his clipboard clutched in his hand like a weapon. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice a dry, nasal drone, "I'm afraid I must address a matter of grave concern." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "Your flower bed." "My flower bed?" I replied, feigning innocence. "What about it?" "It's unkempt," he declared, his eyes narrowing. "It's disorderly. It simply does not conform to the aesthetic standards of our community." He said aesthetic standards as if Silver Springs Meadow were some kind of architectural masterpiece, rather than a collection of nearly identical houses. "The wildflowers, Mr. Carter, they're wild." "They're flowers, Jerry," I said, trying to remain calm. "They're supposed to be a little wild." "They're weeds, Mr. Carter," he retorted, his lips pursing. "And weeds are not permitted in Silver Springs Meadow. You need to replace them with HOA-approved shrubs, immediately." He gestured towards my carefully arranged flower bed, as if it were a biohazard. "Uniformity is key to a high-class neighborhood." Jerry, true to form, didn't just complain to me directly. He weaponized the HOA, unleashing the full force of its bureaucratic might upon my unsuspecting flower bed. Within days, I received an official notice, printed on crisp HOA-branded stationery. "Violation notice. Your flower bed does not comply with the HOA's approved landscape design. Please replace it with grass or HOA approved shrubs immediately. The words were in bold, all caps, as if my colorful blooms were a threat to national security. The notice went on to cite some obscure bylaw about maintaining a cohesive community aesthetic and preventing visual chaos. It threatened escalating fines and potential legal action if I failed to comply within 14 days. This is absurd, I thought, my internal monologue growing increasingly sarcastic. My little flower bed is a threat to the neighborhood? It's a few roses and daisies, Jerry. It's not a jungle. The sheer pettiness of it all was astounding. The Silver Springs Meadow HOA, it seemed, had nothing better to do than micromanage their residents' landscaping choices and enforce a beige-toned dictatorship. I'd heard stories, of course, whispers of other HOA battles, Mrs. Gable and her overly pink flamingos, Mr. Henderson and his birdbath that was attracting the wrong sort of birds, even young Timmy Smith and his lemonade stand shut down for being an unlicensed business. I tried to reason with Jerry. I explained that the flowers were attracting pollinators, that they were adding beauty to the neighborhood, that they were, in fact, quite harmless. I pointed out that other houses in the neighborhood had flower beds, some even more unkempt than mine. "Those are established gardens, Mr. Carter," he retorted, his eyes narrowing. "Yours is new and non-compliant." He refused to budge, his mind seemingly made up, his clipboard his only source of truth. I stood in my front yard, staring at the offending flower bed, the HOA's violation notice crumpled in my hand. I could comply, of course. I could rip out the flowers, replace them with grass, or some bland HOA-approved shrubs, and surrender to Jerry Peterson's demand for uniformity. But something inside me rebelled. This wasn't just about a flower bed. It was about principle. It was about the right to express my own individuality, to add a touch of color to my own property without being harassed by a power-hungry, aesthetically challenged tyrant. If Jerry and the HOA were so obsessed with uniformity, with control, with approved landscaping, then I'd give them something they couldn't control. I'd give them the opposite of a flower bed. I'd give them a cornfield, I thought. A new idea, bold and wonderfully ridiculous, beginning to take shape in my mind. A full-blown cornfield in my front yard. It was landscaping, wasn't it? It was technically a vegetable garden, which, according to the HOA bylaws, was permitted. And it was, without a doubt, the most gloriously inappropriate response to Jerry Peterson's demand for conformity that I could possibly imagine. The HOA rules mentioned non-functional decorative gardens being banned, but farmland? That was a new one. It was a loophole, a way to exploit the system's own absurdity, a chance to turn their obsession with rules against them. It was a plan so audacious, so unexpected, so utterly un-Jerry-like that it made me grin. "Gerald Peterson, you want a war on wildflowers? You've got one. Prepare to be cornered," I declared internally, a surge of defiant energy coursing through me. It was time to escalate. It was time to fight back. It was time to plant some corn. A lot of corn. Okay, so I decided to turn my front yard into a cornfield. The next logical step? Figure out how to actually grow corn. And more importantly, how to do it in a way that would maximally annoy Gerald Peterson without technically breaking any laws. Or, HOA bylaws, which are basically laws in Verdant Vista. My browser history went from best wildflower varieties to corn growing techniques, and is it legal to build a scarecrow in your front yard? In record time, I muttered, scrolling through pages of agricultural advice. I felt like I was prepping for the SATs, only instead of studying vocabulary, I was cramming on kernel density and tasseling. The HOA bylaws, bless their beige-loving hearts, were surprisingly vague on the topic of vegetable gardens. They encouraged them, actually, probably envisioning neat little rows of tomatoes and zucchini, not a towering wall of maize. There was that bit about non-functional decorative gardens being banned, but farmland? That was a new one even for them. And height restrictions? Nope, nothing. It was like they'd never even considered the possibility of someone weaponizing agriculture. I grinned. This was going to be fun. The trip to the farm supply store was an experience. I walked in, a city boy in slightly too clean jeans, and announced, "I need enough corn seed to plant my entire front yard." The clerk, a guy who looked like he'd wrestled alligators for fun, just raised an eyebrow. "Your entire front yard?" "Yep," I said, trying to sound confident. "Going for a rustic look." "Rustic, huh?" He chuckled. "Well, you've come to the right place. What kind? Sweet corn, field corn, popcorn?" I blinked. The kind that grows tall?" He grinned. "I got just the thing." He led me to a bin overflowing with seed corn, enough to feed a small army. Or, cover a suburban front yard. Getting the yard ready was less fun. My flower bed was easy enough to clear out. A bittersweet goodbye to the roses, but a necessary sacrifice in the war against beige. Then came the tilling. I rented one of those rototiller machines, the kind that looks like a lawnmower on steroids. It promptly tried to buck me off like a mechanical bull. "Having fun there, neighbor?" a voice called out. It was Mrs. Gable, peering over the fence, a mixture of amusement and concern on her face. "Just, aerating the soil," I yelled back, wrestling with the tiller. "Promoting healthy root growth." I'm pretty sure she didn't believe me, but she just smiled and shook her head. Jerry, on the other hand, was not smiling. He stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching me with the intensity of a hawk eyeing a particularly plump field mouse. He didn't say anything, but his glare spoke volumes. It said, "You're up to something, Carter, and I'm going to find out what it is." Challenge accepted, Jerry, challenge accepted. The corn grew and grew and grew. It was like watching a time-lapse video, only in real time. One day I had bare dirt. The next, tiny green shoots. And then, seemingly overnight, towering stalks that dwarfed my house. My front yard was no longer a yard. It was a field. A sea of green, rustling in the breeze, creating a surprisingly soothing sound, unless you were Jerry Peterson, in which case it probably sounded like the trumpets of the apocalypse. The neighbors were, shall we say, intrigued. At first, there were the cautious glances, the whispered conversations, the "what on earth is he doing?" looks. But then the curiosity kicked in. "So, Dale," Mr. Henderson said, sidling up to me one afternoon. "Growing a little corn, are we?" "Yep," I said, popping a kernel into my mouth. It wasn't quite ripe yet, but I was committed to the bit. "Going for that amber waves of grain look. Very patriotic, don't you think?" He chuckled. "It's certainly something." Even the kids loved it. They'd play hide-and-seek amongst the stalks, imagining themselves as explorers in a vast, green jungle. It was the best and cheapest entertainment in Verdant Vista. Jerry, of course, was losing his mind. He'd stomp past my house, his face a mask of fury, muttering about eyesores and property values, and the complete and utter degradation of suburban aesthetics. And then, I added the scarecrow. Not just any scarecrow, mind you. This one was special. It wore an old polo shirt and khakis I'd found at a thrift store. I topped it off with a pair of oversized glasses and a meticulously crafted clipboard made of cardboard. It was a masterpiece. I named him Mini Jerry. "Just keeping the birds away, Jerry!" I yelled cheerfully as he stormed past, his eye twitching uncontrollably. He didn't reply. He just kept walking, faster this time, his sensible shoes clicking furiously on the pavement. By midsummer, my front yard was a full-blown cornfield. The stalks were taller than me. The leaves rustled in the breeze, and the ears of corn were starting to ripen. It was a magnificent sight, a testament to the power of nature, and a healthy dose of spite. It was magnificent. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. And it was all completely 100% HOA loophole exploiting, and possibly a little bit insane, I thought, surveying my handiwork. It was time for the final touch, the detail that would truly solidify my status as the Corn King of Verdant Vista. I commissioned a small wooden sign, hand-painted with rustic lettering. It read in bold, playful letters, "Welcome to Peterson Family Farms." I mounted the sign at the edge of my property, near the sidewalk, where it would be clearly visible to every passerby, and, most importantly, to Jerry Peterson. It was the perfect finishing flourish, the cherry on top of my cornfield sundae. It was a declaration of ownership, a tongue-in-cheek nod to the absurdity of the situation, and a constant, unavoidable reminder of Jerry's impending doom. The stage was set. The corn was high, and the battle for suburban supremacy was about to reach its climax. And I had a feeling I knew exactly how Jerry would react. The unveiling of Peterson Family Farms was a moment I'd been eagerly anticipating, and Jerry Peterson's reaction did not disappoint. It was a meltdown of epic proportions, a Karen-esque explosion of rage and disbelief that would forever be etched in the annals of suburban legend. It was a Saturday morning, and I'd strategically positioned myself on my porch, sipping coffee and pretending to read a book, waiting for Jerry's daily property inspection walk. And right on cue, he rounded the corner, his khakis pressed, his polo shirt tucked in, his clipboard clutched tightly in his hand. He saw the cornfield, and he stopped. His reaction was physical. It was like watching a cartoon character whose head was about to explode. His jaw dropped, his eyes widened, and his face went through a series of colors that I didn't even know were possible. He sputtered, he stammered, he made a series of incoherent noises that sounded like a strangled goose attempting to yodel. Then the screaming started. This is unacceptable!" he shrieked, his voice reaching a pitch that could shatter glass and probably set off car alarms. He stormed towards my house, his sensible shoes clicking furiously on the pavement, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. "You've turned your front yard into a farm. It's rural." I emerged from behind a particularly tall cornstalk, a picture of calm, unruffled composure. "Good morning, Jerry," I said, my voice dripping with feigned politeness. "I see you've noticed my new landscaping. What do you think? I was going for a rustic yet sustainable vibe." "It's corn!" he roared, his face now a shade of purple that I'd previously only seen on particularly ripe eggplants. It's tall, and there could be raccoons." He seemed particularly horrified by the possibility of raccoons, as if they were some kind of mythical corn-loving beasts that would descend upon the neighborhood and wreak havoc. "It's a vegetable garden, Jerry," I corrected him gently. "Perfectly within the HOA guidelines. You said no to non-functional decorative gardens, remember? This," I gestured towards the towering stalks of corn, "is highly functional. I plan to eat it." But, it's a field," he sputtered, his voice cracking with desperation. It's unsuburban. It doesn't blend in." "I'm promoting sustainable urban agriculture, Jerry," I explained, with a perfectly straight face, "and providing a habitat for local wildlife. Plus," I added with a wink, I think it adds a certain je ne sais quoi to the neighborhood, a touch of rustic charm. Watching Jerry's face contort with rage and disbelief was more satisfying than any perfectly arranged flower bed could ever be, I thought, struggling to suppress a laugh. He was practically vibrating with indignation, his perfectly pressed khakis threatening to spontaneously combust. It was a performance for the ages, a meltdown of epic proportions, and I was enjoying every second of it. Jerry, predictably, called an emergency HOA meeting, demanding the immediate removal of my agricultural abomination. He envisioned a swift condemnation, a unanimous vote to dismantle my cornfield, a restoration of order and beige to Silver Springs Meadow. He was, as usual, in for a rude awakening. The meeting, held in the same beige-walled community center room, which, I noticed, was starting to look even more drab in comparison to my vibrant green cornfield, was a scene of utter chaos. Jerry, looking increasingly frantic and disheveled, presented a PowerPoint presentation titled Cornfield Chaos: Why Urban Agriculture Threatens Our Suburban Way of Life. The presentation was a masterpiece of fear-mongering and hyperbole, filled with blurry photos of my cornfield, exaggerated claims about its negative impact on property values, and a series of increasingly unlikely scenarios. Slide 1. Raccoon infestation, a threat to our pets and children, with a picture of a cartoon raccoon wearing a bandit mask. Slide 2. Excessive noise pollution, the rustling of leaves will drive us mad, with a picture of a sound wave labeled danger. Slide 3. Attracting undesirable elements, farmers, with a picture of a silhouetted figure wearing overalls and a straw hat. Slide 4. The complete and utter destruction of our neighborhood's aesthetic harmony, with a picture of my cornfield next to a picture of a perfectly manicured, utterly boring beige house. His arguments were met with a mixture of skepticism, amusement, and outright hostility. The other HOA members, it turned out, were not as enthusiastic about banning cornfields as Jerry had hoped. Some were secretly impressed by my audacity. Others were simply tired of Jerry's constant complaining. And a few, I suspected, were secretly hoping I'd share some of my harvest. While Jerry fumed and plotted, the rest of the neighborhood was embracing my cornfield with open arms. What had started as a source of curiosity and amusement quickly became a point of local pride. A quirky landmark, a symbol of Silver Springs Meadow's slightly rebellious spirit. Families would stroll through the cornfield, admiring the towering stalks, the rustling leaves, and the surprisingly peaceful atmosphere. Children would play hide-and-seek amongst the rows, imagining themselves as explorers in a vast green jungle. Teenagers started using the cornfield as a backdrop for their social media posts, adding a touch of rural charm to their selfies. Even some of the older residents, the ones who'd initially sided with Jerry, started to come around, admitting that the cornfield was rather attractive and added a certain je ne sais quoi to the neighborhood. And then the ultimate validation. The local farmers market contacted me, asking if I'd be willing to host a suburban harvest festival in my cornfield. They envisioned a community event with hayrides, corn mazes, pumpkin carving, and of course plenty of fresh, locally grown, or rather yard-grown, corn on the cob. It was a public relations triumph, a community relations coup, and a constant, unavoidable reminder of Jerry Peterson's defeat. The cornfield, once a source of controversy, was now a celebrated local attraction, a testament to the power of creative landscaping and the enduring appeal of fresh produce. Jerry, desperate to regain control, tried every trick in the book to force me to remove my cornfield. He cited obscure bylaws. He misinterpreted zoning regulations. He even tried to claim that the scarecrow, Mini Jerry, was a safety hazard and an unauthorized structure. But it was no use. The HOA's lawyer, the long-suffering Mr. Henderson, a recurring character in my suburban battles, it seemed, was forced to explain, yet again, that there was nothing they could do. The cornfield, he pointed out, was technically a vegetable garden, and the HOA bylaws explicitly permitted vegetable gardens. There were no restrictions on crop selection, crop height, or the overall size of the garden. But it's corn, Jerry sputtered, his voice cracking with desperation. It's tall. Yes, Mr. Henderson replied with a sigh. It is, but it's also legal. I made sure to repeatedly use phrases like sustainable urban agriculture, community garden, and eco-friendly landscaping, just to twist the knife a bit more. And then, the final glorious twist. The mayor of Town Name himself showed up at my cornfield, accompanied by a local news crew. He praised my initiative, my commitment to sustainable living, and my creative use of urban space. He even posed for a photo with me, standing in front of the Peterson Family Farms sign, a giant grin on his face. The news segment, which aired that evening, was titled, "Suburban Resident Turns Front Yard into Thriving Cornfield, Defies HOA." It was the ultimate humiliation for Jerry Peterson, a public declaration of his defeat, and a testament to the power of a well-placed cornfield. The downfall of Gerald Jerry Peterson, the self-proclaimed guardian of suburban aesthetics, the terror of wildflowers, was swift and decisive. After the disastrous HOA meeting, the mayor's visit, the glowing news report, and the undeniable popularity of my cornfield, he finally cracked. He resigned from the HOA, his letter of resignation a rambling, incoherent mess of accusations, self-pity, and thinly veiled threats. He blamed everyone but himself for his defeat, claiming he was the victim of a coordinated campaign of harassment, a neighborhood-wide conspiracy to undermine his authority, and a general decline in standards of decency and good taste. He even, in a final act of delusional grandeur, referred to himself as a martyr for the cause of suburban uniformity. Nobody bought it. Within weeks, a "for sale" sign appeared in front of his perfectly manicured and utterly corn-free lawn. He sold his house quickly, at a slight loss. The market, it seemed, was not as enthusiastic about beige conformity as he was, and moved away, presumably to inflict his brand of joyless tyranny on some other unsuspecting community. His departure was met with a collective sigh of relief, followed by a spontaneous neighborhood celebration, held naturally amidst the towering stalks of my cornfield. Peterson Family Farms, as my front yard was now affectionately known, became a local legend, a quirky landmark, a symbol of the neighborhood's slightly rebellious spirit. People would drive from miles around just to see it, to take pictures, to marvel at the sheer audacity of planting a full-blown cornfield in the middle of suburbia. It became a popular backdrop for social media posts, graduation photos, and even a few, surprisingly artistic, engagement announcements. Tourists, actual tourists, started showing up, asking for directions to the Cornfield House and inquiring about its history. But the best part, for me, was watching the neighborhood children interact with the cornfield. They'd run through the rows, playing hide-and-seek, imagining themselves as explorers in a vast green jungle. They'd build forts, create secret pathways, and generally treat my front yard like their own personal playground. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated joy, a testament to the power of nature and a healthy dose of petty revenge to transform even the most sterile of environments. The cornfield, once a source of controversy, was now a source of community pride, a place where neighbors could gather, connect, and celebrate the sheer absurdity of it all. To celebrate our victory and to officially inaugurate the Cornfield as a community asset, I hosted a neighborhood BBQ, a Cornfield cookout, featuring, of course, a menu centered around the star of the show. We had fresh corn on the cob, grilled to perfection, and slathered with butter and salt. We had cornbread, warm and crumbly, made with cornmeal ground from my own harvest. We had homemade popcorn, popped in a giant kettle over an open fire, carefully supervised, of course, and well away from the actual cornfield. And for the adults, I even offered a special limited edition corn whiskey, a surprisingly potent concoction that I'd brewed myself, using a recipe I'd found online, and a still I'd purchased under the guise of home brewing equipment. It was a glorious, chaotic, and utterly delicious event. Neighbors mingled, children laughed, and the air was filled with the scent of grilled corn, wood smoke, and the sweet, sweet taste of victory. Even the scarecrow, Mini Jerry, seemed to be enjoying himself, his straw-stuffed body swaying gently in the breeze, his painted-on frown somehow looking less menacing than usual. With Jerry gone, and the support for the cornfield, the HOA was a changed organization. New board members were appointed, and rather than enforcing rules, they were tasked with making sure those ridiculous rules were removed. And so I remained, the unlikely Corn King of Silver Springs Meadow, the accidental champion of suburban agriculture. My front yard, once a battleground in the war against HOA tyranny, was now a symbol of victory, a testament to the power of creative landscaping and the enduring appeal of fresh produce. It was a warm summer evening. I was sitting on my porch, wearing a straw hat, a gift from a grateful neighbor, sipping a glass of my surprisingly potent corn whiskey, and watching the fireflies dance among the towering stalks of corn. A new neighbor, a young couple who'd just moved in down the street, walked by. "Excuse me," the woman said. "We're new to the neighborhood. We were just wondering, what's the deal with the cornfield?" I smiled. "It's a long story," I said. "But the short version is, I had a disagreement with the HOA about a flower bed." They laughed, intrigued. "Well," the man said, "it's certainly unique." "It is," I agreed. "It is." Who knew that a flower bed and a burning desire for revenge could lead to all this? "I guess sometimes you just gotta plant a cornfield to find your peace," I thought, as I watched the new neighbors walk away, shaking their heads and chuckling. I raised my glass of corn whiskey in a silent toast. To the Peterson family farms, may it forever stand as a monument to the triumph of agriculture over conformity, and a warning to all future HOA tyrants.